Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Now, let me just warn you. It's been a couple of weeks since I've been able to stand up here and preach. I get a little excited when I preach every week. You give me a couple of weeks out of the pulpit, I'm likely to come out of my shoes up here. I'm just warning. Just warning. And I want to tell you that it is so good to be back, to be able to stand back in my pulpit again with my church family, the people that I love so much. Yeah. Amen. It is so good to be back. Before I go any farther, I need to offer a special thank you to Pastor Brian for standing in the gap and preaching biblical truth in my absence. I appreciate that. As most of you know, these have been difficult days for the Dews family. Both my wife and my son have been going through very serious medical issues, and it's been difficult for us. I feel like my house has been in the eye of a storm for quite some time now. I feel like a storm has been battering my house for quite some time now. But I stand here today to tell you that our house still stands strong. Amen. A storm has been battering our house, but our house stands strong today, and there's one reason for that. It's because of our foundation. Our house stands strong today because we built our house on the right foundation. Amen? I want to talk to you today about your foundation. I want to talk about your foundation. Now, 2,000 years ago, in a remote little corner of the world, a man who was known by almost nobody came walking along the shore of a lake one day. And maybe it was a beautiful day just like today. And there were these two fishermen there, Peter and Andrew. And this man walked right up to them and he offered them this invitation. He said, "Follow me." And they did. They left their whole lives behind and they followed this man. And then he came to two more fishermen, John and James. He offered them the same invitation, "Follow me." And these men did the same thing. They left their nets, they left their boats, they left their whole lives behind, and they followed this man. A little while later, he came to a man named Levi, a tax collector. He was hated because of his profession, but this man offered him the same invitation, "Follow me." And Levi stood up from his tax collector's booth and he walked away. He walked away from his old life and he followed this man. Now, I don't know about you, but I sometimes wonder what else Jesus said to those guys that day. I mean, they had to have some conversation, right? I mean, they must have talked about what it would mean to follow Jesus, what they would be doing, where they would be going. They must have talked about how to leave your old life behind, how to leave your family behind. There must have been conversations between Jesus and these men. But the Bible doesn't tell us about those conversations. And I think there's a reason for that. I think it's because the Bible wants you to focus on that single command right there. The Bible wants you to focus on those two words. Follow me. Whatever else you may think about this man, he walked around offering people this incredible invitation, "Follow me." Now, some people said yes to that invitation. And saying yes to that invitation meant many things for them. It meant growing. It meant learning. It meant meaning. It meant purpose. It meant hope. But saying yes to that invitation meant many other things too. It often meant poverty. It often meant suffering. It often meant failure. And ultimately, it meant death. Of course, everybody's going to die. We're all going to die. The only real question is, have you found something worth dying for? Well, when people said yes to that invitation, they found something worth dying for. Amen? Amen. Now, once this man had gathered together a group of followers, he led them out to this mountainside, and he had them all sit down, and he began to teach them. We now call this the Sermon on the Mount. And in this sermon, Jesus beautifully describes what it really means to be a child of God. He beautifully describes how being a child of God is an inside job. And how we have to change our hearts. And then, at the conclusion of this sermon, Jesus tells everyone gathered there that day that they now had a very important decision to make. He said, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Guys, let me tell you exactly what Jesus just said to me right there. Jesus just said, Theo, one day you're going to build a house for you and your family. And one day a storm is going to hit your house. And your house will stand or it will fall depending on your foundation. Jesus just asked me what I've built my house on. What did you build your house on? Because a storm is coming. And Jesus was certainly right about that last part. A storm has come to my house. A storm has been battering my house. But my house stands strong today because we built our house on the right foundation. Amen? We built our house on the rock. With those words right there, what Jesus is doing is he's challenging everyone in his audience that day and everyone in his audience today. He is challenging them to make the biggest decision of their lives. Will you be his disciple or not? Will you be his disciple or not? And we need to talk about this word disciple a little bit. A lot of people are really unclear about this. There's a lot of people who think that we're just here to become Christians. And that being a Christian means that we believe in Jesus. And because we believe in Jesus, then one day we'll go to heaven. But by focusing only on the belief part, you completely ignore the great decision that Jesus just challenged us with. Listen, Jesus never asked anyone to just believe in him. He asked them to follow him and to do what he taught them to do. Jesus never invited anyone to be a Christian, but he invited everyone to be a disciple. And a disciple is simply a student. A disciple is a learner. Now, if you're a student, if you're a learner, you know it. There's nothing unclear about it. You know it. Like if you're learning how to play golf, you know it. Right? You found somebody who knows how to play the game. You become their student. You're learning how to play golf. Nothing unclear about it. If you're learning how to speak Spanish, you go find someone who knows how to speak Spanish, you become their student. And you know it. You know if you're a student or not. If somebody asks you if you're learning to speak Spanish, you don't say, well, geez, I don't know, let me think about that. You always know. You know whether you're a student or you're not a student. And you might be a good student, you might be a bad student. But you always know whether you're a student or not. So the question is, are you a disciple or are you not a disciple? Are you doing what Jesus says to do? Are you spending time every day in His Word? Are you doing your best every single day to do what He tells you to do? Are you a disciple or are you not a disciple? And you might be a good disciple and you might be a bad disciple. But you know whether you're a disciple or you're not. And you know what? This is actually a really important point to understand. Being a disciple doesn't mean being a great disciple. And you might be a really bad disciple. Jesus had plenty of them. He did. Listen, half the time we see Jesus with His disciples, He's bawling them out for what bad disciples they were. You know, I mean, Jesus is always saying things to them like, how long shall I put up with you? Jesus says to them, oh, you of little faith. He said to them, you're going to deny me 3 times. He said to them, get behind me, Satan. Look, He said to His disciples, don't you know me? Even after I've been among you such a long time. He said to them, could you not even pray with me for 1 hour? Listen, these men Jesus chose, they were not very good at being disciples. But that's not what mattered. What mattered was they were committed to being disciples. Amen? They weren't very good at it. Not yet. But they have chosen to be with Jesus. They have chosen to give their lives to Him. They have chosen to do their best to do what He tells them to do. Jesus says the most important decision you will ever make is, will you be His disciple? Not, will you be a Christian? Not, will you go to church? Not, will you put a Jesus sticker on your car? Jesus says the most important decision is, will you become His disciple? Will you actually do what He tells you to do? Will you do what Jesus says to do with your hands? Will you use your hands to serve others? Will you do what Jesus says to do with your feet? Will you go where He says to go? Will you do what Jesus says to do with your eyes? What you look at, what you watch. Will you do what Jesus says to do with your heart? Will you love the people He asks you to love? Will you do what Jesus says to do with your mind? Will you think on what is holy and not on the unholy? Will you do what Jesus says to do with your words? Will you use your words to always build others up? Will you actually do what Jesus says to do? Listen, this is what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. And then at the end of that sermon, Jesus presses His audience for a decision. He tells them, you now stand at a great crossroads. Whether you know it or not, you are standing at a great crossroads, and you will either take the narrow road that leads to life, or you'll take the broad road that leads to destruction. But you are standing at a great crossroads. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. He says, if you're wise, you'll do what I tell you to do. And listen, man, there is no good reason not to do what Jesus says to do. Because what Jesus tells us to do is always, always, always the best thing for us. Doing what Jesus tells us to do is the best chance we have at peace and power and purpose and prosperity. There is no good reason not to do what Jesus says to do, because He always has our best in mind. Following Jesus is the best way. There's no reason not to do it. Imagine you got a job at the greatest company in the world, and the CEO is this brilliant, really inspirational guy, and he takes a special interest in you. And he comes to you one day and he says, I want you to work on this project. I want you to develop these skills. And you say, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm just going to do things my own way. Can you imagine? Can you imagine getting drafted to play on the greatest sports team in history, and the coach is this legendary guy? He always knows how to get the best out of his players. And the coach comes to you and he says, I want you to practice these drills. I want you to study this playbook. And you say, no, I'm going to do it my own way. I really want to be on the team. I really want that uniform. I really want that championship ring, but I'm going to do things my own way. Can you imagine? Can you imagine standing before Jesus one day and trying to explain to Him why you didn't do everything He told you to do? Can you imagine? I mean, how do you think that's going to work out for you? Listen, you're going to stand before Jesus one day, and you're going to have to explain to Him why you didn't do what He asked you to do. How do you think that's going to work out for you? Well, Jesus just told you exactly how it's going to work out for you. And in fact, just to make it really clear, just so you would not misunderstand, He told you this little story. And in fact, it's not one story, it's actually two little stories, isn't it? There's two little stories here. And the way to understand these stories is, you look at what's the same in each story, and then you look at what's different. And when you find what's different, then you've got the point of the story. Okay? So let's look at these two little stories. First of all, in both of these stories, everybody builds a house, right? Did you notice that? Everybody builds a house. Now, you can substitute the word house with the word life, because that's what Jesus is really talking about here, isn't it? What Jesus is really saying is, everybody is forming a character. Everybody is creating a destiny. You are building your very soul, with God's help or without God's help. You are building your house. You are building your life. Now, we build our lives with 1,000 little decisions that we make every single day. You ask me, what do I build my life with? I'll tell you what you build your life with. You build your life every day by deciding, how am I going to spend my time? What words am I going to choose to speak? What thoughts will I allow to occupy my mind? How will I spend my money? Who will I choose to love? Who will I choose not to love? Everybody builds a house, and you are building your house with 1,000 little decisions that you make every single day. Everybody builds a house. That's the first thing that's the same in both these stories. The second thing that's the same in both these stories is everybody faces a storm. Everybody faces a storm. You know, it's funny because we spend so much time and energy trying to avoid the storms, don't we? We get on our knees and we cry out to God to keep the storms away from us. But there is no way to avoid the storms. A storm is going to hit your house. 6 months ago, my son started having seizures. And then right about the time we thought that storm had passed, my wife came down with a terrible disease and spent 3 months in a wheelchair. And then right about the time we thought that storm had passed, my son started having seizures again. My house, my family, we've been in the eye of that storm for quite some time now. But there's nothing unique about us. Every one of your houses has been in the eye of that storm. Everybody faces a storm. That's the second thing that's the same in both these little stories. Everybody builds a house. Everybody faces a storm. The difference is, what is your foundation? What have you built your house on? Jesus says something fascinating here. He says, a storm is coming. He says, you're going to build a house. Your house is going to get hit by a storm. And when it does, your foundation is going to be revealed. Think about what Jesus is telling you here. The storm will always reveal the foundation of your house. Think about what that means to you. Listen. In the days ahead in your life, everything you are and everything you've ever done is going to get revealed. Think about that. A storm is coming. A reckoning is coming. And everything you are is going to be revealed. I don't know about you, but man, once in a while, something I'm ashamed of will get revealed. And it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, and it can be painful.
So, if you see somebody around it,
imagine standing before God.
we'll go out with the keys.
Everybody builds a house. Everybody faces a storm. The difference is, what are you building your life on?
Amen.
Listen, guys, you will either build your life on the foundation of Jesus, or you'll build your life on the foundation of you. You will build your life on the foundation of doing what Jesus said to do, or you'll build your life on the foundation of doing what you want to do. And Jesus says it's time for you to make a decision. You're at a crossroads, and it's time to make a choice.
Sugar.
And I need to tell you this. It's all or nothing. This decision that Jesus just placed before you, this is all or nothing. Jesus will be everything to you, or he will be nothing to you. But he's not interested in anything in between. And that's really hard for me. Because truth is, I'd like to be half a disciple. I would. I'd like to follow Jesus as long as it's not too uncomfortable.
Just watch for somebody trying to get in.
I'd like to do what Jesus says to do, as long as it doesn't interfere too much with what I want to do. I'd like to offer Jesus just a little bit of surrender. I'd like to offer a little devotion. I'd like to offer a little generosity. I'd like Jesus to come real close when I need him, and then I'd like some distance all the other times. That's my truth. I'd like to be half a disciple. But I can't live in half a house. And I cannot build on half a foundation. You know, very important detail here. Jesus doesn't say that this is a story about a good man and an evil man, does he? He says this is a story about a wise man and a foolish man. This isn't about good or evil. And that's an important detail, because the truth is, most of you would never choose to be evil. But you guys choose to be foolish all the time. Yes, you do. Parents will understand this. Whenever your kid does something foolish and you ask them why they did it, what do they say? I don't know. I don't know, it just happened. It just happened. Hey, well, why'd you shove that marble up your sister's nose? I don't know. It just happened. Why did you put your sandwich in the DVD player? I don't know. It just happened. Why did you build your house on sand? I don't know. It just happened. It just happens. Nobody gets married planning on getting divorced. It just happens. Nobody takes a job planning on getting fired. It just happens. Nobody plans on going through life joyless and angry and disappointed. It just happens. Nobody plans on going to hell. Huh? It just happens. So, rock or sand? Wise or foolish? Be his disciple or don't be his disciple. But that is the decision that God has asked me to place before you today. And before you make that decision, there's one other thing God wants you to do. He wants you to count the cost. Jesus said, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and is not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. Jesus is telling you to very carefully count the cost. And really there are two costs that you've got to count. The first is the cost of discipleship. What's it going to cost you to be his disciple? What does it really mean to die to myself and to take up his cross? What does it mean to surrender my whole life to him? Like if I decide to become a disciple of Jesus, what's that going to mean for my money? What's that going to mean for my sexuality? What's it going to mean for my free time? If I decide to be a disciple of Jesus, how is that going to change where I go and what I do and what I say? What is it going to cost me to be a disciple of Jesus? God says you better count the cost. You better count the cost. But there's another cost to count, isn't there? And that's the cost of not being a disciple. What price am I going to have to pay if I decide not to follow Jesus? Well, I know what happens in my life when I stop following. I don't know if this ever happens to you, but sometimes I'll get like 3 or 4 days down the road and realize I left Jesus back there somewhere. Does that ever happen to you? Sometimes I stop following. And let me tell you what happens in my life when I stop following. My whole life becomes disappointing. It just does. As soon as I stop following, I become a slave again to my fear and my ego. When I stop following Jesus, I become a slave to my desires. I stop following Jesus, and my whole life becomes a soap opera real quick. This is just me talking, but for me, the cost of following Jesus is very, very high. But the cost of not following Jesus is even higher.
Amen.
So, will you be His disciple or not? When Jesus was teaching on that mountainside, something happened deep in the hearts of the people who were sitting there that day. They heard His words, and they knew His words were true. And they said to themselves, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for my whole life. To finally be free from all my worry and my ego and my greed and my fear. This is the foundation I've been looking for. To give myself to something bigger than me. To know that there is something after death. This is it. This is what I'm giving my life to. Amen? And again, this is just me talking. But I've got a whole lot of experience following Jesus. And I've got a whole lot of experience not following Jesus. And here's my truth. I would rather have Jesus and give up everything in the world than to have everything in the world and give up Jesus. That's not true. So I made up my mind. I made my decision. I'm going to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to go where He says to go. I'm going to do what He says to do. And I will try my best every day to be the man that He asks me to be. What about you? Where do you stand? Right now, guys, this is the time for you to count the cost and make a decision. Right now. And remember, the question is not, will you be a Christian? The question is not, will you go to church? The question is not, will you believe in Jesus? The question is not, will you go to heaven one day? The question is, will you become His disciple? Every one of you was given a card when you walked in here today. You got that card? Pull that card out. Everybody pull your card out and take a look at it now. I want to tell you what this is, my friends. This is a pledge card. This is a commitment card. And here's what it says. I am enrolling in the school of Jesus. I make Him my master. I will do what He says to do. I will go where He says to go. I will surrender my whole life to Him. Now here's what we're going to do, guys. Listen to me now. Some of you made that decision a long time ago. There might be some of you who are ready to make that decision for the very first time. There might be someone here today who thought they made that decision a long time ago, but they realized they really haven't been following at all. But wherever you are in your walk, listen, if you are ready to make that decision, then I'm going to ask you to sign that card.
Okay.
Now listen, if you're not ready to make that decision, do not sign that card. I'm telling you right now, this is a contract between you and God, and He will hold you accountable. So if you're not ready to make that decision, no shame, no worries. You come on back next week and just keep walking on that journey. But if you're ready to make that decision, then I'm going to ask every one of you to come right here. There's pens on the communion table, and there's extra cards if you didn't get one. I want you to sign your name to your card right there, and then walk over here to the cross, and you tell God about the decision you just made, and you ask Him to hold you accountable for your decision, and then you lay your card in the tray at the foot of the cross, and go about your day. Amen? Carl's going to play. You just come on up and sign your card and make your commitment and talk to God at the cross. Just come.